In the summer of 1914, life on the streets of Europe's capitals proceeded at the familiar pace of horse carts and pedestrians. But that quiet rhythm was interrupted by a silhouette that stretched across multiple city blocks, a shadow hundreds of feet long, blocking out the sun. As the First World War ignited, military commanders facing the Eastern Front realized they had a massive logistical problem. The theater stretched nearly 800 miles from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Across that vast expanse, armies could move hundreds of thousands of men completely undetected. The generals were practically blind. Early military aviation offered little help. Looking at the Ettrick Taube, you can see the limitations. Its delicate canvas and wire wings mimicked the shape of a bird, but it was fragile, unprotected, and lacked the fuel capacity to fly deep into enemy territory. To see past the horizon and map the movements of the Russian Empire, the German military needed a vessel capable of crossing immense distances and staying airborne for over 30 hours. They turned to the rigid airship. The initial strategy for these floating giants was straightforward: fly low over the battlefield and report back on troop positions in real time. That approach collapsed almost immediately. During the Battle of Tannenberg in August 1914, descending to a low altitude over an active combat zone proved suicidal. The German airship ZV was ordered to scout a railway station. By flying low enough to see the tracks, it drifted right into the sights of a Russian horse artillery battery. Punctured by shrapnel and rifle fire from these primitive cannons and ground troops, the massive vessel rapidly lost hydrogen and crashed behind enemy lines. The loss forced an immediate change in tactics. To survive, airship crews had to push their machines higher into the atmosphere, well beyond the reach of standard ground fire. But at those altitudes, they could no longer distinguish a cavalry unit from a dense forest. Stripped of their ability to scout precise military targets, command found a new use for their high-altitude fleet. If they couldn't observe the army, they would bypass it entirely and drop high explosives directly onto civilian cities. Building an airship capable of carrying heavy payloads across the Eastern Front sparked an intense manufacturing rivalry. On one side was the famous Luftschiffbau Zeppelin. Their design relied on a rigid metallic framework made of an advanced lightweight alloy called Duralumin. Competing against them was Schütte-Lanz. Instead of metal, they built their highly streamlined hulls using laminated plywood, shedding weight to gain an aerodynamic edge. But the wooden girders of the Schütte-Lanz required a highly specialized adhesive to hold the layers together, known as Luward glue. When deployed to the east, the airships encountered a harsh, moisture-heavy climate. The damp air attacked the Luward glue, causing it to rot. The structural integrity of the wooden frames simply dissolved mid-campaign. In the harsh laboratory of the Eastern Front, surviving the elements was just as critical as surviving enemy fire. The metal Zeppelins endured, while the wooden frames decayed. Launching these surviving machines required a massive logistical footprint. The military built gigantic wooden hangars, nicknamed Walhallas, and depended on a constant, highly volatile supply chain of pressurized hydrogen gas delivered by rail. Once airborne, the crews had to navigate deep into hostile territory. To avoid being spotted by searchlights and anti-aircraft batteries, the pilots learned to steer their enormous vessels directly into thick, heavy cloud banks, cloaking themselves completely. But a blinded airship cannot aim. The solution was the Spähkorb, or sub-cloud observation car. A crew member rode in this streamlined bucket, lowered 750 meters below the clouds. Hanging in clear air, the observer saw the city below, relaying bomb coordinates up the telephone wire to the blind crew. This innovation disconnected the source of the attack from the sight of the victims. Residents would feel the deep, rhythmic thumping of Maybach engines vibrating in the ground beneath their feet, but the sky above remained clear until the bombs hit the pavement. In September 1914, the German military unleashed this tactic on Warsaw. The goal was to shatter Russian morale by demonstrating absolute aerial dominance. On September 26th, a wooden Schütte-Lanz airship made its combat debut. Gliding quietly along the Warsaw-Vienna railway line at dawn, it slipped past Russian fortress batteries and dropped its payload near the Vistula River. Because an aerial bombardment was entirely outside human experience at the time, the people of Warsaw didn't hide. Instead, they treated the arrival of these flying leviathans as a public exhibition. On October 10th, the deep drone of engines echoed over the city again. Thousands of civilians poured out of their homes, crowding onto balconies and rooftops to watch the display in the sky. The Russian defensive batteries opened fire, sending hundreds of artillery shells upward. The shells missed the airship. Instead, the jagged metal shrapnel exploded and rained violently back down onto the packed streets, killing 15 spectators. The local fascination with these machines ended that afternoon. The sight of a Zeppelin over the city was now linked to the reality of metal falling from the sky. Municipal authorities immediately forced the vibrant capital into shadows. Street lamps were painted black on their top halves, and heavy blinds were mandated for every window. The sudden, invisible threat of death falling from the clouds took a severe toll. Medical professionals in the city began documenting extreme psychological trauma among the population, some of the earliest recorded cases of what would become known as air raid shock. By August 1915, the Germans occupied Warsaw, and the tactical reality quickly flipped. As the Russian army retreated, a lone Russian biplane returned to drop a single heavy bomb onto the occupying forces, a parting strike the local press called a final visiting card. The reign of the rigid airship would not last. Within a few years, the development of incendiary bullets and highly maneuverable fighter planes turned the massive hydrogen-filled envelopes into highly flammable targets. The silent giants eventually vanished from the sky, replaced by the heavier-than-air planes that once scouted below them. But their campaign over the Eastern Front achieved a darker milestone. By deliberately bringing the destruction of the battlefield directly to the homes of civilians, the airship crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, pulling the modern world into the era of total war.